Have you ever had a moment that cracked your soul open? Not a slight inconvenience, not a small frustration, but a moment so profound, so sudden, that it split your life into two timelines before and after. A breakup, a betrayal, a diagnosis, a death. The moment you realize the ground beneath you isn't stable anymore. You reach out, but nothing's there. No answers, no direction, just silence and pain. It's the kind of moment that doesn't just hurt, it transforms you. But only if you let it. You see, the Stoics had a radical belief about suffering. They didn't view it as a mistake or an interruption. To them, pain was the enemy. Resistance was. Because pain by itself is a signal, a teacher, a force of nature. But when you resist it, when you fight it, deny it, avoid it, you don't just suffer. You multiply your suffering. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, wrote quietly to himself, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself but to your estimate of it." Think about that for a second. It's not the event that torments us, it's the story we attach to it. This shouldn't have happened. This always happens to me. I can't go on like this. We create mental storms around emotional wounds. And then, we blame the storm for our drowning. But what if you didn't fight it? What if you could sit in your grief without needing to escape it? What if you could say, "This hurts and I'm still here"? That is not weakness. That is emotional strength. That is stoic maturity. Imagine standing in a rushing river. The current is cold and violent. You're panicking, struggling, trying to resist the pull. But the more you thrash, the more exhausted you become. Then, suddenly, you stop. You stop fighting the current. You breathe. And you let yourself float, not giving up, but letting go of resistance. That's what emotional mastery looks like. Not numbing yourself. Not suppressing your pain. But learning to stay. To be still. To let the pain speak without letting it take over your mind. Pain doesn't need your resistance. It needs your awareness. And when you give it that awareness, something incredible happens. It starts to move, to evolve, to soften. You begin to see that what you thought was a breakdown is actually a breakthrough in disguise. That moment of collapse, it's not the end of your story. It's the place where your real self begins to emerge. This episode is not about silver linings or feel-minus good fixes. It's about standing in the middle of the fracture and learning to breathe there calmly, clearly, like a stoic. Because the truth is this: you can't control what breaks you, but you can choose how to meet the breaking. And in that choice lies your power. So today, we're diving deep into 12 timeless stoic truths for anyone who's been cracked open by life. Each one is a handhold on the cliff, a whisper in the dark, a reminder that you are not alone and that pain is not your prison. It is your portal. And if this message moved you, share it with someone who's carrying something heavy too. Because we all break, but we don't have to break alone. You don't need to be strong. You just need to stay. There's a quiet lie we've all been told. That strength means being unshaken. That the measure of resilience is how well you hide your pain, how quickly you smile again, how little you need anyone else. But that's not strength. That's a performance. And like all performances, it leaves you hollow when the curtain drops. The Stoics knew better. They knew that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply whispers, "I'm still here." Because being present with your pain is far harder than pretending it's not there. It's easy to distract yourself, to scroll, to binge, to run. But presence asks you to stop. To feel the tightness in your chest, the ache in your bones, the weight behind your silence, and to feel it without flinching. Presence is not passive. It is active courage. The kind of courage that doesn't fight reality but faces it. The kind that doesn't mask the trembling but stays with it. Because when you stay with the pain, something begins to change. Not outside, not right away, but inside. You stop being the victim of emotion. You become the observer of experience. You don't drown in the wave, you learn to ride it. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Your power isn't in pretending you're fine. It's in remaining conscious when you're not. That's what builds real resilience, not the absence of emotion, but the ability to feel deeply without losing your center. Let me tell you a story. There was once a soldier who lost everything in battle: his comrades, his leg, his former life. People praised him for how strong he was. But one day, someone asked him what made him so resilient. He didn't talk about stoicism or toughness. He said, "Every day I sit with the sadness. And every day, it teaches me something new." That's it. No dramatic rise. No motivational speech. Just presence. You see, strength isn't about domination. It's about dedication. To truth. To feeling. To healing. The moment you stop performing strong and start being honest, you reclaim your life. You give yourself permission to be a full human being, not a facade. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Approving yourself doesn't mean hiding the tears. It means staying conscious when they fall. It means breathing through the storm rather than faking the sunshine. That's the kind of bravery the world doesn't understand. But it's the kind that saves you from collapsing under the weight of pretending. Presence isn't easy. Especially when the world wants you to smile, move on, bounce back. But you're not here to bounce. You're here to be, to stand, to feel, to heal, and to learn what pain is trying to reveal. So if today you feel like you're breaking, don't try. Don't numb. Don't pretend. Just sit. Breathe. Feel. Because right there in the center of your sorrow is the seed of transformation. You don't need to be strong. You just need to stay. Let the breakdown become the breakthrough. There comes a moment when everything collapses. Not just around you, but within you. Your plans unravel. Your identity dissolves. The person you thought you were no longer fits the shape of your life. And in the wreckage, a terrifying question arises. Who am I now? That moment is what many fear. The breaking point. The downfall. But the Stoics saw something else hidden in the ruins. They saw an invitation. Because the breakdown is not the end. It's the doorway to something deeper. Epictetus reminded us, circumstances don't make the man. They only reveal him to himself. When you fall apart, you meet the parts of yourself you never wanted to face: your fears, your fragility, your forgotten need. But you also meet something else. Your real strength. Because what breaks in the breakdown is not your essence, it's the illusion. The version of you that was built to please. To perform. To avoid discomfort. That version had to go. And yes, it hurts. Deeply. We grieve not just what we lost, but who we thought we were. But from that grief, something sacred stirs. A chance to rebuild, this time, from truth. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." But I would add, to rebuild is an act of wisdom. You see, the Stoic path isn't about never falling. It's about falling with awareness. It's about seeing the collapse for what it is, a clearing. A space to grow, something that couldn't have existed before. Let me give you an image. Think of a forest after a fire. It's charred, silent, empty. But underneath the ash, something is happening. New growth. Roots reaching deeper. The land, once overgrown with clutter, becomes fertile again. That's what happens to your soul in breakdown. It burns away the noise, the false identities, the outdated expectations, and it leaves you with the soil of becoming. This is why the Stoics didn't fear adversity. They embraced it, not because they enjoyed pain, but because they knew pain was often the only honest messenger. When your life stops working, when your strategies for success stop bringing peace, when your old habits begin to harm you, that's not failure. That's truth trying to break through. So if you're in a breakdown right now, pause. Don't rush to fix it. Don't patch the cracks. Sit in the rubble. Look around. Ask, What is life trying to show me? What illusion just fell away? What deeper part of you is being revealed? Because the real danger isn't the breakdown. It's pretending it didn't happen. It's rushing to rebuild a life that no longer fits your soul. The Stoic stands in the ruins not with despair, but with curiosity. He knows that what feels like death is often just a shedding, a necessary loss before a more aligned self can rise. So if your world is collapsing, don't panic. Breathe. This isn't the end. This is the space where something new begins. The breakdown is not your enemy. It is your beginning. You can't heal what you refuse to face. There's a quiet war happening inside many of us. Not a war with the outside world, but a war with truth. It's the part of us that says, "I'm fine," when we're not. The part that keeps busy to avoid the silence. The part that shoves pain into the corner, hoping it'll disappear if we just don't look. But here's the hard truth, the one the Stoics never sugarcoating. You cannot heal what you won't acknowledge. Avoidance is not peace. It's postponement. And what you postpone, you empower. Pain that's ignored doesn't die. It festers. It hides in your choices, your patterns, your voice. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But when you avoid your reality, your imagination turns into a prison. A place where you replay past wounds. Where your future is colored by what you won't confront. That's why the Stoic begins with clarity. Not comfort. Not escape. Just the quiet, brave act of turning toward what hurts and asking, "What are you trying to teach me?" That question changes everything. It doesn't solve the pain, but it strips away the shame. And in its place, it plants presence. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine a splinter in your hand. Small, sharp, painful. But instead of removing it, you cover it with a glove. You pretend it's fine. Eventually, it gets infected. The pain spreads. It becomes more than just a splinter, it becomes a wound. That's what avoidance does to our emotional lives. Every ignored heartbreak, every buried regret, every unspoken truth, they don't go away. They deepen. But facing pain, that's when healing begins. And no, it doesn't mean diving recklessly into trauma. It means being honest. Honest about the patterns you repeat. Honest about the fears that still whisper in the dark. Honest about what you've been pretending not to feel. Because healing doesn't require drama. It requires truth. And truth, for all its sharpness, is what sets you free. The Stoic doesn't numb. He listens. He doesn't judge the ache. He studies it. He asks, "What is this showing me about my attachments, my expectations, my avoidance?" That's not weakness. That's wisdom. It's the wisdom to stop hiding from yourself. To stop performing peace and start practicing presence. You see, we often fear our pain will consume us if we look too closely. But the opposite is true. The pain only controls you when you pretend it's not there. The moment you look it in the eye, it begins to soften. Because pain is not a monster. It's a messenger. It's the signal that something inside you is out of alignment. Not broken. Not ruined. Just in need of your awareness. So ask yourself, what feeling have you buried under productivity? What memory have you numbed with distractions? What wound still aches because you've never let yourself feel it all the way through? You don't have to solve it all today. You just have to show up to look, to breathe, to feel. Because that's what healing looks like. Not perfection. Just presence. Again and again. And when you do this, when you stay with your truth without fleeing, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust yourself. Not because you're always happy, but because you're always honest. And that honesty, that's how the Stoic heals. Not by force, but by facing what is real with calm, with courage, with clarity. Suffering shared is suffering halved. There's a myth we carry quietly, unconsciously. That strength means carrying everything alone. That if we're really resilient, we won't need anyone. That pain is something to hide, to manage in silence, to tough out behind closed doors. But that belief doesn't make you strong. It makes you lonely. And the Stoics, though often misunderstood as advocates of emotional isolation, never glorified solitude as suffering. They knew something deeper. That while your response to pain is your responsibility, your path through it doesn't have to be walked alone. Seneca wrote, "No one can live happily who regards themselves alone." To live well is to live connected. To suffer well is to allow yourself to be seen. No, and not saying spill your heart to everyone. Not every moment requires an audience. But there's a quiet power in choosing to not suffer in secret. Let me tell you a truth that took me years to learn. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to hold it together. It's to say, "I'm not okay. Not yet." Not for pity. Not for rescue. But for recognition. Because being witnessed in your pain by someone who listens, who sees without judgment, is not weakness. It's human need. And the Stoics, though firm in self-minus mastery, were also deeply human. They valued friendship, mentorship, community. They knew that wisdom doesn't grow in isolation. It grows in relation through shared experience, honest reflection, and open-minded-hearted connection. Think about how we treat physical wounds. If you broke your leg, you wouldn't hide it. You'd ask for help. You'd see a doctor. You'd use crutches. But emotional wounds, we hide them like shameful secrets. We pretend nothing's wrong. We distract. We numb. And in doing so, we multiply the pain. Because what we conceal controls us. But what we name, what we share, begins to lose its grip. So ask yourself, who knows what you're carrying? Have you allowed to see the real weight? Not your filtered, polished version, but your tired, trembling human self? And if the answer is no one, not even yourself, it's time to open that door. Because suffering in silence isn't stoicism. It's pride. And pride at its root is fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of appearing fragile. But here's the paradox. The moment you allow someone to see you as you stop feeling fragile. You feel strong. Not because your pain is gone, but because it's no longer hidden. No longer shameful. No longer a solitary burden. And this doesn't mean you depend on others to heal you. It means you trust others enough to walk beside you while you heal yourself. Even if that other is your own reflection at midnight whispering, "I see you, and am still with you." That's where the healing begins. In the courage to let the walls down, to let the light in, to say, "This hurts, but I'm not carrying it alone anymore." Because strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It's the ability to share it with grace. And in that sharing, suffering is halved. Not erased, but softened. So if you're struggling, don't hide. Find your people. Find your voice. Find the version of you that believes healing can happen not in isolation, but in honest connection. Because we're not here to suffer silently. We're here to suffer wisely. Together. Your worst moment does not define you. There's something cruel about the way memory works. You make one mistake, say the wrong thing, trust the wrong person, break down when you were supposed to hold it together, and somehow that single moment becomes your identity. Not just something that happened, but something you are. You are like a label in the one who failed, in the one who wasn't enough, in the one who couldn't hold on. But the Stoics offer a different lens. They didn't deny failure. They simply refused to be defined by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Your lowest point? That's not your limit. It's your lever. It's not the story, it's the starting point. You see, identity is not built at the moment of collapse. It's built in the moments after, in the silence that follows, in the choice to stay awake, to not let that one moment narrate the rest of your life. Let me ask you something personal. What memory are you still carrying like a sentence? What mistake plays on repeat in your head like a punishment? And now ask yourself this: has it taught you anything? If the answer is yes, then it was never just failure. It was education. The Stoics never aimed for perfection. They aimed for progress. Seneca said, "No man was ever wise by chance." Wisdom isn't inherited. It's forged through fire, through regret, through recovery. So if you're still holding on to shame over something you said, something you didn't do, someone you lost, let this sink in. That was a moment, not a definition. You are not the version of you that broke out. You are the version of you that stood back up. Even if slowly, even if quietly, even if you're still getting there. Scars don't mean shame. They mean survival. They mean something tried to break you and didn't succeed. You're still here. And that matters more than anything behind you. Think of nature, how a forest burned to the ground becomes richer soil. How new trees rise from ash. Your spirit is no different. You can be burned and still grow. You can be scarred and still beautiful. The Stoic doesn't run from regret. He examines it, learns from it. What's it refine, not define his character. That's the shift. From punishment to purpose. From memory to meaning. From I failed to I learned something I couldn't have learned it any other way. And if the world still tries to label you by your worst moment, let them. But don't join them. Retrain the voice in your head to ask better questions. Not why did I do that? But what do I know now that I didn't then? Not what did I lose? But what did I gain in wisdom and compassion and strength? Because when you live by learning, no experience is wasted. So if you're stuck in a story that says, "This is who I am because of what I did," pause. That's not truth. That's torment. You are not what broke you. You are what you built after. You are what you chose to become when the easy path was to collapse. You are the one who didn't stay down. And that not the failure, not the phallus who you truly are. There's a quiet take that lives inside many of us. Not the ache of what happened, but of what never did. The life we thought we'd have by now. The person we were supposed to become. The polished version of ourselves we carried in our minds for years, flawless, successful, always in control. And when reality doesn't match that image, when we fall short of the life we imagined, shame creeps in. Not because we failed in action, but because we believe we failed in essence. But here's the Stoic truth, maybe the most liberating one of all. You don't have to become the person you thought you were supposed to be. Because maybe that version of you was never real to begin with. Maybe it was built on comparison, on childhood conditioning, on societal expectations that never fit your soul. Maybe what's hurting isn't that you've changed, but that you've outgrown a role you weren't ever meant to play. The Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that suffering doesn't come from what is. It comes from our resistance to what is. It's not the change that breaks us. It's our refusal to release the old identity. Seneca once wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to try harder. It's to let go. Let go of the story that says you must always be composed. Let go of the vision that demands constant achievement. Let go of the idea that your worth is tied to perfection. Letting go isn't giving up. It's waking up. It's choosing alignment over illusion. It's saying, maybe I'm not who I plan to be, but I'm exactly who this moment needs. And yes, it hurts. There's grief in releasing a version of yourself you've carried for years, even if that version was never really yours. There's discomfort in stepping into the unknown, especially when the familiar feels safe, even if it's suffocating. But the Stoic doesn't seek comfort. He seeks truth. He knows that discomfort is often a sign that growth is happening. Let me offer an image. Think of an acorn. It doesn't cling to its shell when it's time to become an oak. It cracks open. It splits. It lets go of its form so it can live into its potential. So ask yourself, what version of you are you still clinging to? What roles are you still playing out of fear, not authenticity? What dreams are you chasing not because they feel right, but because you're afraid of what it means if you stop? You are not a failure for changing. You are not lost because your path took a turn. You are simply evolving. You are becoming someone truer. And yes, people may not understand. They may mourn the version of you that felt easier for them to handle. Let them. You aren't born to be understood. You were born to be yourself. Not the projection. Not the performance. The presence. The real you, messy, evolving, alive. So pause. Breathe. Ask, what if letting go isn't the end of me, but the beginning? You don't need to return to who you were. That version of you served its purpose. Now it's time to release it with reverence. Because the youth that's waiting beyond the illusion, that's where your peace lies. Not in control, but in congruence. And the moment you choose that, you stop performing life. You begin to live it raw, real, awake. In a world obsessed with movement, go faster, do more, chase harder. Stillness is often misunderstood. They call it laziness, a lack of ambition, falling behind. But that's only because they don't understand its power. The Stoics did. To them, stillness was the absence of action. It was the presence of mastery. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, fought wars, buried children, and still, every morning, he turned inward. Not to escape the world, but to return to himself, to remember what mattered, to reflect, to recalibrate, to be still. Because here's what the Stoics knew. If you don't choose your stillness, your chaos will choose it for you. If you don't slow down, life will stop you. Through burnout, through breakdown, through the slow erosion of clarity, until you no longer recognize who you are. Stillness isn't passive. It's an act of defiance in a world addicted to noise. It says, I will not be rushed. I will not let urgency replace intention. I will not mistake movement for meaning. Let me give you an image. A glass of muddy water, shaken, chaotic. But if you let it sit, if you stop stirring, clarity rises. The mud settles, and you see what's always been there. Stillness is that pause. The one where your emotions calm, your vision sharpens, your truth returns. But we resist it, don't we? We fear what we'll feel in the silence. The grief, the regret, the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. But here's what the Stoics teach us. What you won't face in stillness, you'll repeat in chaos. Avoidance doesn't end pain. It extends it. Stillness, on the other hand, processes it. It allows it to speak, to pass, to teach. Epictetus taught his students to remain unmoved under provocation, not because they lacked emotion, but because they trained their minds. They practiced the pause. They knew that reaction is surrender, and stillness is sovereignty. Think about it. How many decisions have you made from panic that you later regretted? How many words spoken in haste left wounds behind? Stillness gives you back the space to choose, to respond instead of react, to reflect instead of repeat. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first, especially when everyone else is sprinting, when the world keeps spinning, posting, shouting. But remember this, you are not a machine. You are not here just to perform, produce, repeat. You are here to feel, to think deeply, to live deliberately. And that kind of life, it begins in stillness. So ask yourself, when was the last time I chose stillness? Not because I was too tired to move, but because I was wise enough to stop. What if my next breakthrough isn't in another task, but in a quiet moment with myself? The Stoic doesn't rush. He listens. He breathes. He acts when the time is right, not when fear demands it. So if everything feels loud right now, if life feels like it's spinning faster than you can keep up with, step back. Close your eyes. Be still. Because in that silence, you'll remember, you are not lost. You are here. And here is where strength lives, not in motion, but in presence. You are allowed to begin again. There's a quiet heaviness that builds over time, not from what we've done, but from what we haven't. The promises we made to ourselves and didn't keep. The habits we swore we'd break. The goals we never reached. And somewhere along the way, a toxic belief takes root. It's too late. Too late to change. Too late to heal. Too late to start over. But here's what the Stoics would say. It is never too late to begin again. Because life doesn't measure you by how quickly you succeed. It measures you by how often you return. Every moment is a return. Every breath is a reset. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. And your mind? It doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. To remember that you are not bound to who you were yesterday. You are not trapped by your past failures. You are renewable. Every single day. Seneca said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." He didn't say it comes after success. He said it comes from the end, even the end of a mistake, a collapse, a chapter you regret. That means even your lowest point can be your new beginning. Even your worst mistake can become your turning point. But to begin again, you must first forgive yourself. Not for failing, but for believing that failure disqualifies you from trying again. It doesn't. In fact, failure is the very proof that you are alive, that you are engaged, that you are still in the arena. The Stoic doesn't shame himself for falling. He simply asks, "What now?" And then he takes the next right step. Let me give you something practical. Beginning again doesn't mean reinventing your life overnight. It means choosing one small act that honors your future. Putting the phone down and walking outside. Opening your journal, even if it's been months. Apologizing to someone you've wronged. Returning to that book, that habit, that prayer, that silence. You don't need a plan. You need a pause. A pause, long enough to remember. I am not done. You see, the real obstacle isn't failure. It's shame. Shame says, you've wasted too much time. Shame says, you don't deserve another chance. But Stoicism says, begin again. Every single day. Every single hour if needed. Because the person who returns over and over is unstoppable. Not because they're perfect, but because they are committed. So if you're feeling stuck, if the weight of your past feels heavier than your hope for the future, stop. Breathe. Remember you are still here, which means the page is still blank. And this next sentence, it's yours to write. Not yesterday's version of you. Not the world's expectations. Just you showing up again. Because the power isn't in never falling. It's in always rising. And rising begins with one choice. To begin again. Your scars are not shameful. They are sacred. We live in a world that worships the flaws. Perfect skin. Perfect resumes. Perfect lies, propped and filtered for display. And in that world, anything cracked is seen as weakness. Anything broken must be hidden. But the Stoics would tell you otherwise. They would say, your scars are not shameful. They are sacred. Because scars don't show that you failed. They show that you healed. That you were wounded and didn't stop there. Seneca, who lived through exile, political betrayal, and the looming threat of death, knew the truth of suffering. And yet, he wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Your wounds aren't proof that you're weak. They are the very reason you are stronger now. Look at your life. The places that hurt the most, the heartbreak, the loss, the moments you thought you'd never rise again. And yet, you did. Maybe slower than you hoped. Maybe quieter than you imagined. But you rose. And that rise? That's what the scar represents. Not the pain itself, but the passage through it. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks are not hidden. They're illuminated. The break is not shame, it's beauty. What if your life is the same? What if your brokenness is the very place your gold is meant to shine? The Stoic doesn't try to return to who he was before the pain. He honors the pain by becoming better because of it. By integrating it, not hiding it. You see, the world will often try to define you by what hurt you. But the Stoic defines himself by what he did with that hurt. Pain, when processed with awareness, becomes wisdom. Scars, when honored, become a map tracing the path of growth. Think of someone you admire. I guarantee their strength was born in comfort. It was carved by suffering, by persistence, by refusing to let wounds become walls. So ask yourself, what scars are you still trying to hide? What parts of your past are you treating like stains instead of sacred chapters? What if, instead of asking, why did this happen to me, you asked, what did this teach me? Your scars might remind you of what you've lost, but they can also remind you of what you've gained: resilience, clarity, humility, purpose. They are not signs of damage. They are signs that you faced something unbearable and came out the other side with something new. Maybe a deeper empathy, maybe a quieter strength, maybe a capacity to feel what others cannot. So don't rush to erase your scars. Don't apologize for them. Wear them, not with pride but with reverence. Because those marks, they are your gold. They are the proof that even in your darkest hours, you didn't disappear. You endured. And that endurance, that's what the Stoic celebrates. Not perfection, but presence through pain. So the next time you feel the need to cover up, to pretend, to hide the places you've been cracked, pause, breathe, and say to yourself, this scar is not the end of me. It's the evidence that I'm still becoming. Everything changes, even this. Pain has a strange way of convincing us it's forever. When we're in the thick of it, heartbroken, grieving, lost, it feels like the light will never return. Like this moment, this heaviness, this ache is the new normal. But the Stoics knew something essential. Something that modern minds, consumed by urgency and instant relief, often forget. Everything changes. Even this. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, all is ephemeral, fame and the famous as well. Not as a way to dismiss life's beauty, but to free himself from the illusion that anything, good or bad, is permanent. That includes your suffering. Because the nature of life is rhythm. Seasons come and go. Tides rise and fall. The moon appears full only to fade. Your pain? It's just another season. It may be long. It may be stormy. But it will pass. And when you really let that in, not just as a concept, but as a deep cellular truth, something loosens. Your grip on despair softens. Your panic quiets. Your urgency gives way to trust. Trust that time, like water, can wear down the sharpest grief. That you don't need to rush the healing. You only need to stay open to the process. The Stoic doesn't pretend pain isn't real. He simply doesn't make it eternal in his mind. Because permanence is the root of panic. But impermanence, that's where peace begins. Let me offer you this. Think back to a time when you thought you'd never feel okay again. A loss, a breakup, a collapse. Remember how endless it felt? And yet here you are. Not untouched, but standing. Changed, yes. Scarred, maybe. But present. Breathing. Still able to choose your next step. That's what impermanence gives us, the possibility of renewal. Of beginning again. Even when we thought we cowed it. Seneca said, time heals what reason cannot. And sometimes, the most rational thing you can do is simply wait. Stay awake. Stay grounded. And let the storm pass without trying to outsmart it. You don't need to understand every emotion to survive it. You don't need to fix everything overnight. You just need to remember. This is a chapter, not the whole story. The Stoic doesn't numb his pain. He simply refuses to let it define the timeline of his life. Because even sorrow softens. Even anger burns out. Even despair finds a resting place. So if you're in the middle of a season that feels endless, breathe. Whisper to yourself, even this will change. And let that whisper be your anchor. Because the sun may not be visible now, but it has disappeared. It's just behind the clouds. Waiting, like you, to rise again. You are not broken. You are becoming. There comes a moment, often quiet, often terrifying, when you no longer recognize who you are. The beliefs you once held tremble. The goals you once chased feel hollow. The version of you that once made sense begins to dissolve. And in that confusion, the mind panics. It says, I must be broken. But the Stoics, ever calm in the face of chaos, would offer you something different. Something softer. Something truer. You are not broken. You are becoming. Because transformation rarely looks graceful. It often looks like collapse. Like crying on the floor. Like walking away from everything you thought defined you. Like silence. Stillness. Starting over. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." But the Stoics didn't romanticize pain. They respected it. Because they knew pain was not the end, it was the beginning of becoming. Becoming isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. A shedding. A re-smelling. The old self falls apart not because you're failing, but because you're growing beyond it. And growth? It's messy. It's uncertain. It doesn't always feel like progress. But here's the secret. What feels like falling apart is often the exact path to falling into place. Let me ask you something. What if the grief you feel isn't ruining you, but reshaping you? What if the confusion isn't a sign you're lost, but a sign you're letting go of false clarity? What if the sadness is sacred soil? What if the breaking is opening? The Stoic doesn't resist change. He partners with it. He sits in the discomfort not to wallow, but to witness. Because beneath every collapse is construction. Invisible, quiet, slow, but real. So if you feel like you're falling apart right now, don't rush to put the pieces back. Don't rush to fix yourself. Sit. Listen. Let the old shape crumble. Because hidden in that rubble is something raw, unpolished, and powerful. A blueprint. Not for repair, but for rebirth. You see, you're not here to become perfect. You're here to become true. To trade performance for presence. To trade illusion for integrity. To stop living by someone else's definition of whole. And to start living by your own definition of real. Every scar. Every failure. Every choice you made when no one was watching, those aren't marks of damage. They are your becoming. They are the proof that life broke you open, so something deeper could emerge. So when the voice comes, the one that says, you're ruined, you're lost, you're too far gone, answer it with the voice of a Stoic. Say, no, I am not broken. I am becoming. Because this is the sacred fire. And you are not ashes. You are transformation in motion. Let the world keep spinning. Let the noise pass you by. You're not here to escape pain. You're here to face it and walk through it. You just walked through 12 Stoic truths. Not platitudes. Not empty advice. But reminders. Of your strength. Of your depth. Of your unbreakable spirit. If this episode gave you breath, peace, or presence, share it with someone else who's carrying the weight. Leave a comment. Say the Stoic truth that hit you hardest. And if you're ready for more, not just content, but a journey inward, subscribe. Because this is not the end. This is the edge. And from the edge, we rise.